Hello. Oh, sorry. Hello. We are podcast number 9. My name is Carter Hodgson.
I'm Anna Wong.
I'm Olivia Duke.
I'm Connor Sutton.
So we'll hand it over to Anna for an introduction of the authors.
Okay, so I'm doing the introduction of Karl Marx and Engels. So I'm basically gonna talk about their early life before they wrote the Communist Manifesto. So Karl Marx, a revolutionary sociologist, historian, and economist, and he and his junior partner Engels set the theoretical foundation of modern communism. And he also published the uh, Communist Manifesto. And he is born at May 5, 1818, and he's actually from the bourgeois class, where his father was a lawyer and a man of the Enlightenment. And I think this is the most interesting part of the introduction to Marx, because there is a contradiction of his origin and his position, that like he gave up his identity in bourgeois and joined the revolutionary class. And then so going back to his early life, he wrote for a newspaper at the age of 24, and this newspaper actually have a literal democratic side, and he published an essay about freedom of press, and he talked about how he disagreed with the system of censorship. And then later at the same year, he became an editor of the newspaper. And during his career, he wrote article about the society and economics, and this is where he get to know the theory of communism. And later on, this newspaper was actually got suspended because the the content was being too straightforward. And then he started to publish this German-French yearbook with a political philosopher. And then he moved to Paris with his wife, where Paris that time was like a center of socialists and the center for some extreme communists. And then he also met Engels in Paris. And then later on, he published this article, Toward the Critique of the Hegelian Philosophy of Right. And in this article, he states the idea that religion is the opium of the people, and he also raised the objective of the rise of proletarian in this article. And then his thoughts together with Engels' thoughts later become Marxism that we know. And then moving on to Engels' introduction, he is a socialist philosopher, and he was born in 28 November 1820. And then he also grew up in a wealthy family, and he was raised in an environment with modern liberal political view. And both him and Engel also have a passion in the philosophy of GWF Hegel, which this philosophy talked about the conflict of opposing views leads to progress and changes that result in a new union or combination. And this philosophy was also against Christianity. And then he became a volunteer in the army for a year, and this is where he found his talent in military. And then he wrote articles about communism as well in the age of 22 to 24. Then after his discharge, he was inspired by a person named Moses Hess that told him that the outcome of Hegelian philosophy is communism. And then he returned to England for his family business. And England at that time has conflict between classes and have really advanced industry. And then so not only he wanted to maintain his family business in England, but also he wanted to participate and learn more about communism in England. And then he had a 10-day trip to Paris, and this is where he met Marx and they become partners. So for the first communist conference was was when Engels had contributed to form the Communist League, and then his and Marx's thoughts were approved in the Second Communist Conference in London, and then they were authorized to write the Communist Manifesto, which is just to state the principle and objective of communism. So that would be all for the introduction.
Nice.
Perfect. Yeah, so the Communist Manifesto is not just meant to be kind of like a thought experiment, but they basically wrote it to kind of like explain the ideology behind the Communist Party.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was published in London, but I think they're kind of advocating on behalf of like communists across all nations, because as we'll get into, Marx isn't really a nationalist. He has a different view of things from some of the other authors.
Mm-hmm.
So the Communist Manifesto was written by, I think it was written mostly by Marx, I would assume, but him and Engels are both authors on it. And then the secondary reading is a chapter from The Key Texts of Political Philosophy by Timothy Burns and Thomas Pangel. And it basically kind of just goes over the Communist Manifesto, explaining the arguments they were making in a bit more, I would say, like plain language, and bringing in some more like historical context and sort of the philosophical context behind it.
Yeah.
Whereas the Communist Manifesto, at times, he's like, in the secondary reading, they say it's addressed to like proletariat, so it's written to be kind of like something someone might be able to read when they don't have a lot of time, and it's not meant to be like have a lot of like philosophizing in it. It's definitely meant to be kind of straightforward, I would say.
Yeah. They wanted it to be like anyone can access it, to see like a class struggle that they might be facing. And like I think it's important to just explain what a proletarian is. Proletarians are just the general working class that Marx is kind of addressing. And then his like like the people they're kind of going against is like the bourgeoisie, which is like the class that controls the means of production in like a capitalist society. Sorry to kind of take that from you.
No, I was pretty much.
Can I also add, I was going to say, like, in the preface to the German edition, like in my book, which was actually written by Engels himself, he did say, like, the application of a lot of principles will depend, like, on what's going on at the time and the historical conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, he, like, cited some passages that today wouldn't apply.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah, it's important to mention, too.
I do think the proletariat is kind of, it's referencing very much like factory workers, right, as kind of like the core of it, like industrial workforce, versus he kind of contrasts it with like shopkeepers or like peasants, who I assume are like maybe landowners or farmers. So yeah, because this was during a time where like the Industrial Revolution was, I guess it had been ongoing for a while, but it was still kind of in its early stages, so there's like a large population growth and like urbanization, and sort of the factories were growing a lot. So yeah, I think it's definitely important to like know about proletariat and bourgeoisie, because he talks about it a lot. And then the bourgeoisie is like kind of the capitalist class, the factory owners. And I agree with Olivia that like a lot of it is rooted in the class dynamics of his time, and as time has gone on, I feel like one of my like criticisms of, or not necessarily criticism, but one of my considerations of a possible weakness of his argument is that I wonder how much of it is still applicable today, given that lots of people are not working in factories and manufacturing anymore.
Yeah. Oh,
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I think it is we to see what Marx and like Engels would say about like current like a capitalist society like we do, because like we currently have more labor laws to protect workers a bit more, and like in the reading Marx and Engels for the plans for communist society, they want to first like get rid of child labor and like child labor factories, and along with creating like free public education for children. So I think like during their times, obviously they didn't have that. They had more homeschooling, and so it's like, yeah, so it kind of makes you wonder on what is still applicable to from the text to our current society.
Yeah, I feel like capitalism is still like definitely a very like real thing in society today. I don't really know much about capitalism, but I know it's definitely there.
Yeah.
I think there's like the authors spend like a part to talk about the economic system in the supplementary actually reading that like how the because they want lower costs and then they decrease like the salary of people, and then those stuff like that part like the economic thing still makes sense to me in economics theory.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think a lot of it probably is applicable. So I feel like, because obviously there's still communist countries and communist like parties, and if not communist, like sort of parties that have similar ideas in terms of like anti-capitalism. And I think a lot of that is still applicable because fundamentally, and this is one of the things that I'm unsure about too, as we like kind of see AI becoming more of a thing and like technology continuing to increase, is that fundamentally Marx views like wage labor and people's labor as being sort of like the basic economic unit for capitalism. And so part of his argument is that because your capital, like your money, requires sort of all of society to have any use, he sort of views it as like more of a social power than like something you personally should have. And so because it sort of requires society to be used, it should also be owned socially, I think is sort of his argument there. But then when if robots start doing all the work, at that point it's like human wage labor might be supplanted, but I don't know.
I think for like the rise of AI, Marx kind of talks about how the only reason why we kind of push technology and like increase technology under capitalism is just increase production. Marx does say like the technology of like his time was just to increase like it is just to increase production, and I think that we kind of see that with the rise of AI currently, and like how sometimes it is just taking jobs at times, or like kind of just displacing people of jobs. And so like Marx would say like that is just a product of capitalism where it's not really benefiting a working class.
I agree even like further because like AI has a lot of like environmental impacts and stuff. Like I feel like it's even like not benefiting but like harming working class, and like especially like poorer countries they're gonna feel the effects of like environmental impacts. And like, you know, like one search on AI uses like an insane amount of water. So like I feel like it's honestly unethical a little bit to like be using AI, so I would agree with that. Like
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, I definitely think that AI currently, if it's not regulated and not, if basically like if AI is not forced to benefit all of society, then I think it will just be used to replace human workers, so you don't have to pay people. And that is kind of what Marx predicted with this overproduction thing, is that basically to cut costs, you fire your workers, they don't have money so they can't buy as much, which means you have too much inventory, so then you have to lay off more workers. And he viewed that kind of like business cycle as what would ultimately cause the destruction of the bourgeoisie. Basically like the problem to him is no longer that we aren't able to produce enough resources, but it's almost that we produce too much and we're not distributing it efficiently.
Yeah, like under capitalism, it is just like controlled by the bourgeoisie class, as Marx would describe. I think an interesting question to be asked with Marx is getting rid of like eternal truths. So like Marx wants to get rid of like all formal like morality that would be seen like Aristotle, but also like wants to get rid of the family unit, as well as wants to get rid of like religion. Marx is notoriously known for not enjoying religion, as like a famous quote of his is like, religion is the opium of the masses. So I don't know, I kind of want to see what you guys think of like getting rid of like kind of the old world, as Marx may describe it as.
Yeah, I was surprised because he doesn't go into religion a lot in the Communist Manifesto, although he is an atheist. I think he might be the only author in the course so far who's like an outward atheist.
Yeah.
Because I think even Hobbes, I don't know if he goes into his religious beliefs. Obviously, he doesn't favor religion a lot. He's a materialist. But
I feel like there's a difference between like being religious and like really agreeing to religion yourself, and like wait, sorry, I meant the opposite. The difference between like disliking religion and like being an atheist, and then like also like being religious but like seeing that religion is a tool that can be used to like sway politics, which I feel like that's what Hobbes I felt like. I feel
I agree.
he wasn't exactly like atheist, but I feel like he just was like where religion shouldn't be as important. And yeah, I agree that like Marx is like the first like book we've read that like
He doesn't
I feel
talk
like
about God at all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like he's
Not
trying to
even as an
completely
example,
like
right?
Yeah.
erase.
And like
Exactly.
he I feel like I don't know, maybe it's my copy of it, but he does like state like getting rid of religion is like an essential part of a communist society.
Yeah.
I feel that maybe in Marx's opinion it might just be due to the fact like it can be used as like a political tool and not actually like for good. Like you can control like an entire population with religion, like how we've seen in like the New Atlantis, and like how that island is controlled by like the small group of people, and they use religion as a veil.
Yeah, I think that's his criticism fundamentally, is that like his criticism of all these old institutions, and the reason why he like sort of his rebuke to people who want to keep them is basically that like, well, this all serves to just enforce the current state of things. So if we want to change the current state of things, then everything has to go. Like
Yeah.
pretty much
Yeah.
everything has to go.
And like with the family stuff, like he said, like family is like a product of the bourgeoisie. Like they created what family means. And like bringing up a different point, like I also like really thought it was interesting when we talked about freedom, and like freedom according to like the bourgeoisie is not real freedom, and I feel like it's the same thing with family. Like family according to the bourgeoisie is like not real family, so he's like just get rid of it, I feel.
Yeah.
I think that like it's not possible to like getting rid of all those values we talked about, because it's, if you're saying like about family and morality and religion, it's like saying that you get rid of all like the emotions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's hard to take like emotions from people if you're saying like with those values and like truths.
And it is like getting rid of all the old values and like religion, like the family, does feel like a utopian dream that Marx kind of wanted to avoid. Because like he was heavily like the Manifesto like heavily criticizes like socialists of the time, and like how they kind of just work alongside of like the bourgeoisie class.
Yeah, he criticizes like he doesn't like reforming things. He wants it all to go.
Yeah,
I do think there's a utopian element, but but to him, I think he also views that this proletarian revolution, which, and we can argue if maybe he was wrong because he said that was inevitable. It's been a couple hundred years. There's still time. Like feudalism was around a long time. I don't think capitalism is necessarily the end state. I definitely don't think so, but I think he would be surprised it survived this long based on his writing, and maybe he was being hopeful. But I think there's utopian elements to it. But he views it as kind of being the final revolution in this sort of cycle of revolutions, and like the ones he was talking about where it was like the ancient society, then the rise of like Christianity, then the overthrow of feudalism by the bourgeoisie, and now the proletariat are supposed to be the last ones to bring in like the perfect society. So there's definitely, I think his counterpoint to people who are like, well, you know, getting rid of all the old values may not really work, it might be unrealistic, is that to him he's like, well, this is like the biggest revolution that ever will happen, so this is the one where like everything changes. But
I mean, in Canada itself, we've seen more socialism than we have ever communism. Like in Saskatchewan, the NDP started off as a socialist party, the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, and from the CCF we have now from the CCF we've created like healthcare in Saskatchewan. Like we used to have a majority stake in our potash creation, and like a whole list of crown corporations which were all naturalized and owned by the public or the crown, I guess. So they weren't necessarily communist, but they were socialist, and I think Marx would criticize them just quite a bit in like his chapters of like socialists and communists, where these people, they did naturalize a lot of things and like did reform quite a bit, but the CCF did establish they don't want a violent revolution like Marx would describe, and also did not want, and like wanted to keep some of the old ways of life like religion and like the family. They didn't want to infringe on that at all. But I think they did take quite a bit from Marx and like how they wanted to overthrow the current capitalist society that Canada was under and currently is under. But like they did evolve into the NDP, which later did drop that socialist label for political means.
I do think that like the whole accusation of like, oh, you're a communist, you're a socialist, I don't necessarily agree with those ideas entirely, but like I do think it's kind of dumb how those have been demonized so much, because it's like sure, violent overthrow you can criticize. Like maybe you should think that shouldn't be allowed to be in political discourse, or it should be like, people should be speaking out against it. I agree with that. I don't like the violence, etc. But I do feel like I wouldn't mind like the NDP. Yeah, like the fact that they kind of obscure their ideology for political reasons. I've never been a fan of that. I'm just like say it how it is, and like. I don't necessarily have a problem with like having different ideas in political debates.
I think it's for us, for our generation specifically, is due to the fact that we didn't grow up during the Cold War and like during the Red Scare and like the encroachment that the USSR had over like the globe. So it's not like we don't have that Cold War tension that
that's a very good point,
past generations did have. So for us to say like it's we're not scared of like the label of communist or socialist. It would be different from like someone who's
fled those countries.
Yeah,
or
fled those
because
countries.
it wasn't that long ago either. So
like,
no, that's a good point for sure. Because I do see that like people who fled communist countries are like speak out about much more, and that I definitely understand that viewpoint too. Because I don't like there's a lot to criticize about communism, which I'd say is one of the flaws with Marx's idea. Is that every time it's been put into practice, it generally hasn't been super successful. And I think a lot of people would counter that by saying it's because of like capitalist countries kind of sanctioning them and working against them, but I don't know if that explains the full story.
Yeah, Marx does describe it that for capitalism to function, it does have to be like a global like internet, so like all be kind of connected to each other. So it is like, I think Lenin would describe it as like imperialism of like capitalism. That they like, fully need to have control of the entire world to function, for capitalism to function. But I think that would also apply to like a communist society. Like Marx wants the whole globe to be communist.
Yeah, he literally says like working men of all countries unite, unite like in the last page of the Communist Manifesto. Like obviously it's supposed to be a global movement in like Marx's and Engels' opinion.
Yeah, I think Marx very much sees things like he sees all of history as having been defined by class struggles. He views it as like kind of the core component of history throughout time. And I think he kind of like forgoes a lot of like concerns for individual liberties or like culture, things like that, in favor of just focusing on the class struggle, which I think is a good flaw, or is the big flaw in his argument. Because like this, as you said, like capitalism might be global, but communism also has done a lot of like imperial type of things. Like the Soviet Union would probably be the biggest one I can think of.
I think like Marx, like the way he pictured communism, I don't think that really panned out in like real life. Like North Korea, like the USSR, I feel like a lot of times in like actual practice, communism like just doesn't work out the same way that it was supposed to.
Yeah, I know for the USSR at least, Lenin first installed like a more authoritarian government just because of the riskiness of like how like unstable Russia was at that given time. Like they were in the middle of a war, but then they had to pull out. So that's why they installed the first very authoritarian government, but they just kind of kept it throughout the entire history of the USSR. But like democracy can, from my understanding, can function in a communist society. There's not really any, like Marx doesn't denounce democracy, but I guess maybe the eternal truths he might denounce it. So I don't like, would you guys say democracy could still function under like a communist society?
I actually have a really good answer because you guys know like I'm from Hong Kong, so Hong Kong is like apart from China, and China actually is like governed by a communist party, but Hong Kong is like it's like Quebec in Canada, which like we have our own culture and then our own law system, our own government type of stuff, and then Hong Kong actually follows capitalism, and then we were like somehow promised by the mainland government that we will have democracy. But that promise like never exists, and then so like even until now like we didn't get to like have any like democracy, like we didn't pick our like ruler in Hong Kong, whatever stuff, and we don't have like the power to against like those to against like any decision from the the mainland government.
Yeah, and that's not really following sort of an ideal of trying to have everyone be equal. If there's like one section of the country that where all the like central government, all the orders come from there, and there's like limited representation for other people. So yeah, in practice, I think because I think Marx recognized that there would have to be infringements on people's rights and on property rights in the early stages of communism, but I don't know if he did a good job at like justifying what it actually looks like and if it's really justifiable.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, the way communism is written, I feel like, no, I don't think democracy, like, because even the, like, general idea of democracy, like, being able to choose, like, who represents you and, like, the people in charge of your country, like, in a communist society, like, if society's made up of, like, two classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, like, and the proletariat overthrows the bourgeoisie, that's already a huge chunk of society that, like, is being told you have no say. But I feel like the ideas of communism, like, some of the elements, like, if changed, like, I feel like democracy could work. Like, the ideas of, like, how society should operate, I like some of the ideas, but, like, yeah, I feel like the overthrow and, like, silencing the bourgeoisie, like, that, I don't think that really goes hand in hand with democracy.
Yeah, I kind of want to go back to Connor's point of, like, property, because Marx kind of describes, like, he wants to abolish private property, which is mostly, as he describes, is mostly controlled by the bourgeoisie. I think it was like 9/10 is what he would say, but is.
I was gonna ask, like, what do you guys think there's still two classes, bourgeoisie and proletariat? And like, if so, how would you define them? Because yeah, that's kind of like the closest thing I think he gets to, like, he's like the top 10% maybe is like what he considered bourgeoisie in those times. But like, for example, now like, I feel like there's a lot of people who work kind of like comfortable office jobs and probably make a good salary, but they aren't like necessarily huge business owners either. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Because I feel like there's, like, the petty, like, bourgeoisie and then also, like, straight bourgeoisie. I feel like there are a lot of classes. Like, I feel like there's one under proletariat as well.
Yeah,
Like,
the lumpen proletariats, he kind of like describes them as being useless. They're like more the people on the fringes of society.
Right.
Yeah.
I think he briefly mentioned them, if I'm not mistaken, where he says like, maybe, I don't know if he was referencing the proletariat bribing them, but he's like, maybe they'll be bribed into having some role in things, but yeah, he doesn't like them very much, which is kind of like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I also agree, like, I feel like we've shifted from, like, a factory, like, where a lot of people work in a factory, to, like, office jobs, which, like, I feel like he would consider, like, petty bourgeoisie at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think like, maybe like, more modern like bourgeoisie class would, in my opinion, would just be like, say landlords or like, the actual like 0.1% of people, where it's like the billionaire class now, because like they do just control almost everything in our modern life, and then they have to like outsource and exploit a lot of jobs in like Southeast Asia. So I think that's what, at least what I would consider is like the more modern bourgeoisie class. But I don't know.
So
Yeah,
that's like
I agree.
so it's a way smaller proportion of the population than 10% anymore.
But I just feel like a lot of our population has gone from, like, proletariat to petty bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I definitely think, like, one of my criticisms, as we've kind of talked about a few times, is that a lot of the horrible labor conditions at the time, which I think he was right to criticize, have been fixed through, like, democratic means. So I definitely think, like, any argument that democratic means aren't enough to continue improving living conditions, labor conditions, I think you would have to, like, find an argument for that, because it's worked so far, and to some extent, and, you know, society's not perfect.
Yeah.
But, you know, like, there's minimum wages and stuff like that now as well. There's a lot of things that are supposed to be helping the proletariat without a revolution.
I think, not to, like, disagree, I think, like, yeah, objectively work conditions are a lot better. I think Marx may also say, like, that, like, these slight social changes in how workers are treated now might just be to kind of control them a little more, or like just to give them a little more so they don't overthrow the bourgeoisie class.
I was gonna say that, like, if like the conditions stay the same, like, I feel like a revolution was bound to happen, but like if you appease them slightly, like, yeah, they're less likely to
like overthrow.
Yeah.
So I think like, yeah. But another thing I would like to like kind of talk about is like private property with Marx. Sorry, I'm going back to it. Like, he wants to shift away from private property and like have all property kind of owned by the state, but you do get to keep your personal property. So like you could have like a house and that's like your personal property, but it's owned by the state. But it's like nobody can really like no one's allowed to break into it. I assume. I don't know. Like
Well, yeah, that's another thing I don't understand about his argument is he wants the eventual annulment of the state. I feel like one thing is like a lot of this also is based on his perception of human nature because it seems like he basically views it that humans aren't inherently bad, but just scarcity causes them to oppress each other. But he views all political power as being just a legitimation of like one class oppressing another. And so. Wait, sorry, what was the question again?
Like personal property versus like private property,
right?
Where it's like
it was because you said nobody could break in. It kind of because he wants the annulment of the state. So it's like if there's no law enforcement, you're really putting a lot of stake in like humans just being naturally good to not cause problems.
Yeah, I feel like he's a very like I forgot the word, but he like really believes in like humans being good. I feel like it's pretty evident like throughout the whole book.
I guess.
But I was definitely. I'm sorry.
No, you go.
I was just gonna say like I didn't really understand that part either about like the private property, social property, and like the annulment of the state. Because like I agree. Like, how do you like regulate anything when like you're planning to like get rid of
I think
regulations?
Like with if you're like producing your own means, like the assumption is like under communism that you have like everything that you truly need. So it's like. A lot of material things lose its social value, like how property, Marx, I forget exactly where he says it, but Marx does say like property loses its social value, so it's like if you own a house, you don't, you're not thought of like higher if like you have like personal property. I'm trying to find exactly where it is, because it is like a pretty interesting part of it.
I think I know what part you're talking about. I don't know where it is.
Oh yeah, personal property is not therefore transformed into social property. So it's like you still like kind of own it, but then he later goes on and says, "It's only the social character of property that has changed. It loses its class character." So it's the bourgeoisie would like not have the property, and it's. Like, yeah, you're not. I think he would say it's like you're not thought of as higher. You're not like you're not above anybody.
I think so too. I mean, I do think that was a part that was not entirely clear to me, even with the secondary reading. But I think that's basically how I'd interpret it as well. I think he's kind of like, because capital requires all of society. You could still have like personal property, but it's just not going to be like hoarded, I guess.
Yeah, and it's I don't know, like some of the things where it's like, and now I guess in our current society, like the end goal for like a Canadian would just be like own a house, as like unrealistic that it might be now, but I think like a good argument against like communism is like why people would continue to work if like everything is kind of provided to you. By the state. So I don't know. What would you guys kind of say about that?
I think I'm trying to find it, but he like did mention something about that, and he like basically said like if the bourgeoisie was saying like why would people work if everything is provided for them, and he said like he should have like hired dogs a long time ago because like people are working for nothing already.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I think one of his other criticisms too is that under the bourgeois like epoch, he calls it, like the current system basically, a lot of the people who have the most are not the workers, right?
Yeah.
So then I think that's kind of like a criticism, but I agree that there are some like economic concepts I feel like aren't fully answered, like when you think like basically things you're talking about like incentives and those kind of things that aren't fully answered in the manifesto at least. I haven't read his other work, so I'm not sure how much into detail on that side he goes into, because he was an economist, but...
Yeah, I think it's like capital, I think he talks about.
Das Kapital, yeah.
I think he talks about that quite a bit in there. I don't know, I haven't read it, it's huge, I don't really feel like reading that much of it. But I think it is, like, what strives people to work. I guess, like, Marx, like, he kind of says, like, the wage labor is just to sustain people, and it's not really, it's just to sustain like the proletarians, and then like not really to they can't really work up to anything like they could in like feudalism. I think it was his example, like where they could kind of get out of that feudal system, or I forget, or maybe it's the serfdom he was kind of talking about.
Yeah, I think, are you talking about kind of how, like, in the previous, yeah, because I think this is an interesting thing he mentioned too, is that, like, in the previous systems, basically, the ruling classes were able to at least mollify sort of the lower classes by allowing them to kind of sustain themselves. And I think one of his criticisms of the current system is that the proletariat aren't even able to sustain themselves, and, like, I think maybe he's talking about things like charity and stuff, like where the bourgeoisie is having to help out the proletariat because the system isn't allowing them to kind of make their own livelihoods. So I think he's criticizing that failing as one of the reasons why a revolution is justified. But then when you look at it today, that's still the case for sure, but there's also more of a social safety net. So when we talked about like the bourgeoisie just kind of keeping the proletariat in check just enough to continue their power, I wonder how that plays into things.
Yeah, I don't really, can't really have an answer for that, I guess, but, I don't know, what are your, sorry Connor, can you like describe some of the other arguments for, that Marx provides?
I basically think we kind of just talked about most of what I had.
Okay.
We talked about the overproduction. He criticized the reactionaries and reformists. So yeah, like a lot of other socialist ideologies or like anti-capitalist ideologies he would criticize as either wanting to return to the past, which is what he means by reactionary. Because like I guess at his time the nobility were still kind of like an important social force, and they were like talking about how bad capitalism and the bourgeoisie is, but then they were like, we gotta go back to feudalism. And he's like, no. So he was criticizing that. I don't think that's common anymore, but definitely the reformists he was criticizing, that's pretty much all socialist parties in like any Western country would be like a reformist party. Nobody's really calling for like violent revolution anymore, like total upheaval of society. But yeah, I think we pretty much covered most of his arguments. His policy prescriptions in particular, it was abolition of child labor, which has happened. It was centralization of credit, transportation, and communication networks by the government, which in communist countries that's happened, not in Canada. And then
I kind of wish it was, but
like nationalize communications, like the phone plans and
yeah,
stuff.
well,
Yeah. Well, SaskTel, right?
Yeah, SaskTel, like in Saskatchewan, they're set up by the NDP. Yeah, we have, in Saskatchewan, we have quite a bit of our Crown Corps still around. Like SaskTel is a huge one for us. They kind of suck, in my opinion. Like I use SaskTel. Their phone plans, I don't think are the cheapest anymore in Saskatchewan. But like we have SaskTel, we have SaskPower, Sask Energy. All like utility companies are still around, I believe, but like in Saskatchewan, like our potash industry is now privately controlled, and I think it's an Australian company that owns most of our stuff. But like in Saskatchewan, we still do, even though we're like one of the most conservative provinces, we still do see some socialist things. Like I know at least on my reservation, we're starting a uranium mine, and like each of the members, part of my band, is technically a stakeholder in that uranium mine, so we all do still benefit, but that is like a very, very small chunk of the population in Saskatchewan. I think, yeah, so that's about like, what we have anymore, but like in wider Canada there aren't, our Crown Corps are now privately owned, like our, like Air Canada used to be owned by the government, same with Petro-Canada. So it's like, it's a lot of our like social, not social, our naturalized like industries in Canada are now privately owned. I think like it's somewhat unfortunate in my opinion.
I think that actually there was one thing I'd forgotten that I thought was interesting to bring up, is like his whole idea of the proletariat not, because he doesn't think the proletariat will just become another ruling class, because we were talking about like then the bourgeoisie are being silenced. That's not really breaking the class struggles and the class antagonisms in the way that he imagines communism is doing. And communism isn't necessarily like, the secondary reading is pretty much the only place that talks a bit about like what is supposed to come after communism. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx doesn't focus too much on that, and it seems like it's always been kind of vague with his ideology.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's interesting to wonder whether the proletariat really would abolish this class system, because his argument seems to be that they're so disenfranchised and have so little property that they don't really have a motive to expand on their own property, but
Mm-hmm.
to liberate themselves they would have to just destroy private property altogether.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if we see that, because look at I don't know exactly how the privatizations went down in Russia, but I know that they're just run by oligarchs now. So were those former communist politicians? I feel like there's an element of self-interest on whatever leadership is going to be taking over this revolution, right? Like if you look at Stalin, he basically just killed all of his rivals immediately and consolidated power. I'm not as familiar with Chinese history, but did Chairman Mao do something similar? Probably.
Wow.
Yeah, sorry, not to put you on the
No,
spot.
I think
I
Mao-
assume so, though. Lots of people, because he did the Cultural Revolution, which,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he basically attacks other institutions, and they all kind of, consolidate their own personal power. These are all kind of, very personalist dictatorships, where it's, a communist revolution, but then there's, this figurehead who has his statues in every city
Yeah.
square, right?
I think maybe part of the reason why some of these authoritarian figures under communism were so prevalent is just since Marx and Engels don't really describe by what means these leaders are brought up, but also I think that's also due to the fact that Marx and Engels didn't want to tie the Manifesto to a certain nationality or a certain ideology besides communism. So it's the framework that communism is can kind of be applied to any a lot of different states and kind of what their cultural values are, even though they want to get rid of a lot of those cultural values. I think that's why some of the vagueness as you described it is just kind of brought into communism. So I think it's the people are supposed to, the proletarians are supposed to fill in the blanks of what they deem to be
Yeah.
valuable.
Yeah, that's kind of going back to the conversation of can democracy work with communism? I agree, there's not really any instruction on how to actually implement
Mm-hmm.
communism, and I feel what happens a lot in communism is it just becomes authoritarianism and a regime, sorry. But yeah, I think that if it was used in a democratic way in a democratic country, I feel it'd be a lot different from how it has actually played out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And should we go into the Q&A, do you think? So we did.
So, yeah. Where are we at for time?
We are at 42 minutes, so we
Oh,
did
yeah.
pretty good, I'll say.
Perfect.
Some of the questions I think for the class is a pretty good one. Is just why people continue to work under communism. I think we kind of talked about that a little bit, but I would like to hear other people's opinions of it. I don't know if you guys want to kind of look at any of the questions. I have quite a few if you want to. I don't know which ones we want to do.
I was gonna mention for the connection to what we've read in course too, just a little bit there's been a lot of discussion on religion. I feel that's what really stood out to me.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of modern philosophy really different from Aristotle and those philosophers, which I found really interesting. I felt this was more Machiavelli and what was it? Yeah, Hobbes, Machiavelli and Bacon, kind of going away from religion. So I feel that was important to mention.
Mm-hmm.
And then
So I think a question for that then is Marx and Engels want to get rid of eternal truths as they describe it. So does that still kind of really apply to modern society? So I think that's a pretty good question for the class.
yeah.
I also think we kind of talked about this one. Is the bourgeois a unified class? Why or why not? Maybe is it because Marx viewed it as all the classes are kind of becoming proletariat and bourgeoisie, and everything in the middle is sinking into the proletariat, the petty bourgeoisie. But as we were talking about, the petty bourgeoisie might have, depending how you define it, have grown now. And Marx obviously isn't here to tell us what the classes should look like. So that's kind of an interesting one. Is what classes are there in modern society? Is it still that dynamic of bourgeoisie and proletariat, and how do we define that? I think that would be a good question. Are the bourgeoisie unified? Well, they're definitely not unified amongst themselves, but do they still exist as sort of like a composite class, I think is worth talking about. And for my personal thing, a question I would be interested is like, does if AI, obviously I don't think AI is in that state right now, but if it advances and it becomes that a lot of work is now totally automated, does Marx's view of capital, like how does that change if human labor is no longer like the basic component of it, and if it becomes like fully automated? I don't know how that changes things.
Yeah, I think that's all of my questions that I would like to ask. If there's any ones you guys would like to.
I also have like a problem that I want to talk about is that like we're saying like in communism that we want all like the resources collected by the government, and then so like resources is like a type of power we learned from like Poly 100, and then I want to say it's like if like the power is like really centered in the government, like how do we avoid the government to like oppress like its citizens, like how bourgeoisie does to proletarian.
Mm-hmm.
And then I actually have also like I did a research that I want to talk about. So I was looking at like the reselection system in China. So basically like we all have like a law for reselection of president in all countries that like avoid the people to rule the country for too long. And then so I think recently like a few years ago the chairman Xi Jinping just like canceled that reselection law in China. So like basically he can like be selected for unlimited times until like the progress they found the right person to take over like the country. So I was thinking like if like how do we like if a communism country like they develop into a totalitarianism, how the struggle of classes will like turn into the struggle between the government and the citizens.
Mm-hmm. I think like that's like I guess that's not the bourgeoisie class because that's not a really huge capitalist society, but that is like an interesting question to ask like about a ruling class and like a working class. And I think that's more closely to like a monarch almost. I know that's not like what they are, but I think that is like the closest description I would say of what they are.
Something that Marx doesn't necessarily address that I think is also like kind of a legitimate criticism is that when you are talking about totalitarian countries, which seems to like communist revolutions have to usher in sort of that revolutionary government.
Mm-hmm.
When you're spending a lot of a lot of like resources enforcing your control over the citizens, and then like even like internal factions fighting themselves, like when Stalin just executed so many people, and like I think North Korea, in one of my other classes they kind of talked about how like rather than things being done for the people, it's like different interest groups trying to influence the leader to give them money.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like that there's like a wastefulness with that, right? Where it's like instead of these things being done to help everybody, it's being like used in these internal squabbles. So I guess that kind of like goes back to my thing of like, are the proletariat really the class that are gonna stop this? Because it seems like they kind of just, if not bourgeoisie, they kind of just form a new ruling class and then they sort of do the same thing, don't they?
It's like Animal Farm at the end of the book where they all just kind of the pigs turn into the humans and like the farmers. I guess that is what the point of Animal Farm is.
Yeah, I literally like wrote a point about that too, like because when he was talking about like overthrowing like the bourgeoisie, like the proletariat's gonna have to come in power and they're gonna have to like be dictating things, and I'm like, isn't your whole issue like the oppression of different classes? And like you're saying like in order to stop the oppression of the proletariat they need to oppress the bourgeoisie, like isn't that just like redoing the cycle with opposite classes?
Yeah, I think the cycle of like the revolution constantly happening is just an issue that Marx didn't really describe or really answer. Yeah.
And there always is, from like almost every example I can think of, there's always sort of the one strong man who kind of like, it's very like based on their personality. Like kind of a cult of personality seems to develop almost every single time. And I'm kind of curious as to why that is. Because like you said, Marx doesn't talk about any specific political leaders. But even Marx himself, like I was looking him up a bit and I saw he has like this crazy tomb and stuff, like a statue. It's like, I don't know.
I think for my answer for that actually is just like it like they tend to be like a populist leader, because that's what it is like just one group trying to attack another group is like what a populist leader would be. And like we saw that with like the CCF in Saskatchewan. Our leader was Tommy Douglas. He was a very popular populist in our province, and a huge political leader in Canada actually. But like, yeah, like multiple readings I've done for Tommy Douglas is he is a populist man, and like so was Stalin, so was Lenin and Chairman Mao. I'm sure they're all very like that is the reason why they are able to jump up to like the success. And I think that's what is kind of needed for a communist society is like a populist leader, or like at least the revolution part of communism is like you need the populist leader to succeed, at least to unify the class. I think that's what my answer would be to you. Sorry.
No. I think it's a good answer. Yeah, bringing up Tommy Douglas is interesting. I've heard the name. I don't know much about him, but yeah, that's a good answer for sure. Is that it seems to be just a symptom of populism is that it kind of goes into one person, because like even the Castros, I think one of them is still alive, but didn't he like finally step down, but then didn't he kind of come back into the government or something? That could be a bit off, but yeah, he was in power till he was like I think 90 plus 80 plus, which it's like that's a long time, but the people I guess liked him maybe or whatever, or, well I know that Cuba's they don't have like freedom of expression, but
yeah. No, I think these are all good points. I don't know, is that good for you guys, or do you have anything else to add?
I'm pretty happy with that. I thought it was a good conversation.
Well, thank you all for listening then. This was Podcast 9, The Communist Manifesto.